And welcome back to another Perspectives. And this time I'm going with the zeitgeist, that is, of a subject of the moment. A month ago, I did one or two videos on the AI theme because that was the subject of the moment. And I thought I would put some comments to it. Despite my dislike of mainstream news and the mainstream narratives, I do keep an eye on them because they're very telling about what they're showing. And so right now, the zeitgeist is the subject of disclosure. And by disclosure, it means specifically, that word refers specifically in this context to basically telling of information about the truth of extraterrestrial existence and of our government's knowledge of extraterrestrials visiting this planet or landing or crashing on this planet, and of intervention in human affairs. And also I mentioned this because just yesterday in my quartet talk, it was a question of what does this disclosure suggest, especially disclosure from the latest whistleblower, David Grush, an ex-naval intelligence or worked for the National Reconnaissance Office and is now a whistleblower, and it's been spreading across the news, and it's the latest topic. Now, I do have some things to say on this, and I think I'll put this out around the same time as a quartet video comes out, so you can see that where I position myself. And I position myself in that these mainstream narratives are what I call psy-ops. They're a psychological operation. Not everyone agreed with me on quartet about that and thought that maybe I was just being too simplistic in that. But I shared my point of view by saying that these are narratives that have been permitted into dissemination at this time. And there's always been factors of disclosure. I mean, for decades, ever since the so-called Roswell crash in New Mexico in 1947, I believe, there's been this talk of aliens, extraterrestrials being here. So it's not a real disclosure. We've had a lot of ex-military coming forward about this. We had the big press release in Washington, I think over 20 years ago, with the Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. So these are nothing new, but why is it taken by storm at the moment? And one of the arguments put forward in the quartet talk is that this new whistleblower is not coming through mainstream channels. It's coming through alternative channels because the mainstream won't allow it, or, it's coming out through other channels. That actually is not quite true. And if you do a search online, you'll find major news organizations showing this. In fact, the first time I put it in for a scan online, I came across, a big page edition on the UK Daily Mail talking about this, about how David Grush had talked about the malevolent aliens had killed some humans, and the Vatican had known about a crash ship in 1933 in Mussolini's Italy, etc., etc. The Daily Mail is a very populist paper. If you go online and look at videos online, and in YouTube, you'll see that the video, which I think the big interview that started it all off and people are talking about, is on News Nation. And it was, when I looked this morning, it was 9 days old and already has 2.5 million views. And News Nation is a 24/7 news channel in the US, but it's not alternative. News Nation is owned by Nexstar Media Group. The Nexstar Media Group is the largest owner of TV stations in the US. It owns 197 TV stations. So is that alternative? I don't think so. So it's okay. It's not CNN, etc. So it's quite crafty in that it's a mainstream dissemination, but it doesn't look like it's coming from the real mainstream. Now, I think we have to be careful with this notion of disclosure. And the reason I say it's a psy-ops is that there's a lot of psychological manipulation around the theme. Now, certain individuals coming forward may be genuine, and they're always going to have genuine whistleblowers. But I'm not saying that actual individuals are particularly psy-ops. Some are, of course, but the whole institution, that the whole vehicle and the presentation that takes this forward is a manipulated narrative. And we can see that in certain chain events. So, for example, a few years ago, the mainstream narrative tried to change the UFO to UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Again, meaning that they want to name this themselves, and therefore by taking some control over the narrative. UFO narrative has been around, for a long time, at least 80 years or more. But by renaming it, it's like you're getting a new grasp onto it, and you get a new authority. So that renaming is quite significant. And also the fact is that, as I said, there's been many whistleblowers, but right now the timing seems to tie in with a lot of unidentified aerial phenomena, such as we had those strange balloons over the US, and then we had strange meteors, strange lights, even, certain objects which were not balloons but could not be correctly identified, leaving mystery in the air. Then just last week, we had the UFO landing in Las Vegas, where a family said that some tall, strange, eerie-looking aliens ended up in their backyard. And now there's whole surveillance in Los Angeles looking out for aliens. The theme is coming up now. We've had a new disclosure project from Stephen Greer, a new project to legally support the whistleblowers. So when you get all this movement and this vehicle being pushed forward, then, for me, it is a staged, managed operation. And also, actually, in my upcoming book, The Inversion, I had a chapter 5 called Unidentified Spectres, where I talked about this manipulation of what I call spiritual control mechanisms, whereby you take certain of these themes that are supposed to be about human spiritual growth, etc., and you hijack the argument. And one of these is the act of deferred closure. Now, deferred closure means that a certain subject is deliberately disallowed from having any kind of authentic understanding. So there's no real closure on it. And this has been happening in the UFO area for the whole 80 years since Roswell, that you have a leak or a whistleblower, and then you have a denial, and you have then you have a implausible excuse, which everyone knows is not true, like some weather balloon. And then you have, further on, you have leaks, and then you have denial. So all the time you're having these things going back and forth. And then recently, the Pentagon has come out and said, yes, we've got films of the UFOs or UAP. They do exist. And then you get certain commanders-in-chief of NORAD, one of the top military officials in the US command, who's commander-in-chief if you go into emergency government, actually implying that, yes, they have been tracking these unidentified objects. So people are giving out these little clues, which again, it's like winding people in, but not giving enough evidence for closure. And so that actually creates a psychological state where you come to a point where you can have what is called closure starvation. It's a psychological term, meaning that your mind is hungry to be able to close the issue, put a lid on it, which means that you're more susceptible to accept an answer which seems plausible, because you just want an answer. You want the truth. And so if you're giving an answer which is presented to you seemingly looking enough truthful then you're more susceptible to accept it if you are in a state of closure starvation, because your mind just wants to say, okay, that's it. Now I know it, I can put it to rest and leave it aside. And I think many people are reaching this closure starvation point where they want the answer, and then boom, governments come out and say, okay, let's own up. This is the truth. So I think those are signs that there's a psychological manipulation or operation going on. Another thing which I think is significant about this whole UFO theme, which is quite tiring in a way, is that very few people are questioning this as a material paradigm. What I mean by this is that haven't we realized that all this idea of these tin cans coming in and then tin cans crashing and then these floppy biological bodies being there, humanoid looking, or some humanoid looking species sitting around a table, chatting to their interrogators. This perpetuates the material paradigm, is that if there are other intelligences out there, which of course there is, then, there will come visitors in their flying boat, and then they'll land, and then they'll come out and have a chat with us. That keeps the human consciousness actually within the limits of material paradigm. So the universe is a reflection of our understanding that we are a matter reality. Now, when I say that other intelligent species are out there in the cosmos or universe, it's because life, intelligence, consciousness, conscious energy is primary, and materiality and material manifestations are secondary. They come from that. So we already come from a state of consciousness and conscious intelligence. So everything out there there's intelligence out there. The question is it in a material body? But while this UFO theme is retained within the material paradigm, it puts limits on our perceptions and limits on our consciousness. Because actually, what I would say is that the theme of non-terrestrial intelligence is multidimensional. Genuine intelligence is going to be way beyond the physical domain and the physical limitations of our conscious understanding. So any sufficiently advanced species making contact with this planet would not want to come in on a rickety, rockety, tin can ship, because that is actually, what that shows is that we don't have the preparation on a conscious level to actually be in open communication with this other intelligence. If intelligence comes into a planet of lower intelligence and then just arrives on a ship, it's basically imposing itself. And you have this distance between a more advanced species and a lesser advanced species, which could be traumatic to the lesser advanced species. And then you get the whole hierarchical structure set up again. They are like gods and we are less advanced and we worship them. And so any advanced species is going to be very careful not to move into this domain of hierarchical worship, the God structure, let's say. So more likely they're going to operate on the planet in ways to try and help raise the consciousness of this planet, so whereby we can meet them at a more mutual level of conscious understanding. So if you wanted to communicate with a lesser creature or a lesser intelligence, you're most likely, from an intelligent point of view, to assist the other species to raise the level of consciousness so you can have a mutual understanding, a resonance of consciousness. You don't go flying in there. And in fact, I would say that these intelligences have been operative on the planet for millennia. And and they are, in fact, involved in increasing the consciousness upon the planet. And they would do this, most likely, I would say, through seeding ideas into our cultures and societies, through using telepathic contact to seed ideas into the minds of certain people who are then able, people in certain positions that are able to then transmit this understanding through culture, creativity, ideas, architecture, social systems, invention, science. So you would see these ideas into the culture through these areas: science, knowledge, social systems, and then you would help the society to grow. And that in turn would affect the consciousness of people, of the societies, and over time raise a planetary consciousness. So you are more in tune with the other species. And I'm sure that's happening right now, in that they are seeding, or ideas are being seeded through our popular culture, our films, our books, and other means. So we are gradually raising our gradient of conscious awareness. And also, I would say that many people are already in communication with non-terrestrial intelligence, a mind-to-mind contact. Some probably unconsciously, others consciously. Many individuals are speaking about having a contact with other intelligences. We have to trust our discernment here, of course. There's a lot of crazies out there. But what I mean is that any sufficiently advanced intelligence is going to operate in a subtle way and comes from a place of multidimensional comprehension of the existence of life. But when we, as a hierarchical, materially based society, are being presented with these narratives of other species existing in the same material realm, they use ships, they are biological bodies, they need certain things to keep them air to breathe, to keep them alive, food, then I think that we are being constrained within the limitations of material thinking. And that for me is a kind of, it's a way of stunted growth. And at this stage in our evolution, if we get, overwhelmed, or we are crazy about these ideas of these flying saucers coming in and these beings coming out with these big eyes, we think that's like life out there, then obviously we're still children. It's a very infantile way to consider how cosmic life operates and how cosmic life would want to communicate with other so-called intelligent species. So I think this paradigm is a psy-ops, the disclosure. Say it doesn't have to be individuals, but the presentation and the theme and the way it's kept within this controlled material narrative, it's baby food. And whilst we're having the baby food, we're not being fed the real stimulus for development of human consciousness. In fact, it's the reverse, it's the inversion. And so by getting so excited about the revelation that there are other species, well, we should be past that kind of kind of overwhelming stage by now. And we really should be beyond being hoodwinked by a few whistleblowers saying, oh, there's some crashed remains and dead bodies. Does that really excite us? We should be out there with our minds. We should understand the central place that conscious awareness has in universal life, and not being, hoodwinked by narratives of physical crafts and dinky toys crash landing. This will keep us in arrested development. And anything which keeps humanity in arrested development is a psy-ops, and I think we should be wary of that. And I think if you're like me, keep an eye on these narratives, but understand where the attention really should go, because it's just another way of keeping humanity in the sandbox of infanthood. So there's a few thoughts I wanted to share, because I'm always on the lookout for, how cultural narratives and programs are trying to mess with our minds. I'm sure in time we'll get beyond that, but in the meantime, we're like penguins waddling around. So thanks for bearing with me and listening thus far. As always, use your discernment, keep your feet on the ground, stay healthy, stay sane, be grounded. Till next time. Cheers.